Hi, I'm Greg Trezvasti with Deepest Dream. Pleasure to meet you, Anthony.
Nice to meet you, Greg.
So, I am a huge Western fan, and I loved how Surrounded was just visually immersive. Obviously, that takes a lot of work. Can you just, in layman's terms, talk about just preparing just the whole visual language for Surrounded because it was very impressive.
Thank you. I'm a huge fan of the genre. I actually wrote my film school paper on Shane to Unforgiven. So I think I've always had sort of a great love of the classic tropes. But I think the idea of turning those tropes inside out and then adding a social context to it, a layer to it that really relates to today. That's what really attracted me to the movie. I think when you sign on to a Western, you're signing on to making a movie that's going to be hard. We chose a location 2 hours north of Santa Fe called Abiquiu Ghost Ranch, where really they don't make a lot of movies there. It's a very, very tumultuous Jurassic landscape that is really beautiful from every angle. So um, it's not a kind of genre of film where you think it's going to be easy. You're going to be out in the cold and out in the elements for months on end. And so what I think it does, it creates a palette and a temperature that the actors sort of, you can't really escape it. It's not like you're in a air conditioned studio and you can go back to your room. You're sort of just out there, and it keeps you sort of insulated in your character.
The cliche is when a movie star, he or she, they can really fill that frame. And what do you see in Letitia just as a collaborator and as an artist that she really does fill that frame, and it's a very rare quality to have, maybe I'm assuming.
Oh, she's an explosive artist that garners an incredible power. But she's very small and can be very quiet and very sort of humble and simple. And then when she wants to, she lets it go, and she has this incredible energy that fills the frame. You can't stop watching her. And I think that, they say like you want to photograph your subjects, and she just demands the camera's attention in her eyes, in her being, even when she doesn't say anything, and that's a very unique power.
Without giving too much away, I remember I was reading somewhere that Orson Welles studied stagecoach for Citizen Kane. Without giving too much away, there's a stagecoach scene which is how did you how did you do that? Where it's sort of a runaway situation. Is it? I'm thinking this has to be some kind of CGI situation. I don't know what's going on because it's just a thrilling moment. There's so many thrilling. But how did you mount that scene? I just
Regretfully, some very authentic stagecoaches were destroyed. It was a very tough scene to shoot, probably the hardest scene I've ever shot in my life, because um, you're using real horses, and you have to be very careful on how you work with horses to make sure that they don't get injured, especially out in that terrain. So we're really working close with our horse wranglers and our advisors to make sure that we're not pushing them to a place where there's danger. But then obviously we need speed and propulsion to make it look real. So, you're doing every trick in the book to make sure it feels heightened and elevated and still raw and exciting. If you watch a lot of old stagecoach sequences, you can really tell that they're, just shaking the stagecoach, shooting at the sky. And sometimes that really works for a shot. You'd be surprised when you get somebody throwing dust and shaking a stagecoach and you shoot with the right lens. You can really feel like you're in the moment, but you can't substitute the big, wide action sequences and things that really sell the moment. And certainly, there's a very dramatic ending to that is not CGI at all. It's actually real.
That's amazing. And some
Yeah.
westerns they're just really good on the visuals, but the script might be lacking, or vice versa. But Surrounded has both of them. I guess in simple terms, how were you able to just perfect both? Because it's so hard to actually make a tale very well balanced, I suppose.
Well, I think they're exclusive to each other and intrinsically tied to each other. I think when we're creating a story, or I'm working with a writer to evolve a script, obviously character and story is first. But what makes me a director and not a writer is that when I'm working with a writer, I'm injecting a visual language into it. So what I find is the scripts that I developed, not like other directors or not writers, have a visual language sort of written into it. So when you read it, you can really feel it. I do a lot of like books and visuals and mood boards, and I use music, and I spend a lot of time scouting films and spending time on location, and I don't really shot list or storyboard. I sort of create these collages, and then I bring my heads of departments into that conversation, and they add their piece, and then that becomes sort of a casting sort of book that when we have our actors, we sit and we really do. I like to do a lot of rehearsals, a lot of table reads, a lot of in sort of comfortable home environment or outside, nowhere rehearsals where we sort of discover the language and the interaction and the feel. And then, that starts to become a language of, well, how do we document this thing that we've just created? And even after all the preparation, I like to come to set and sort of throw that away. Obviously on the long 6-minute opening shot, you can't throw that away. But I think, one thing I learned a lot of in the short form format is you got to be ready to make changes. Jay-Z walks on set and goes, yeah, I don't like that. Let's do this. You have to, okay, what can I do? How do we, and taking a little bit of that mechanism and applying it to movies, and just saying, trusting your process. I know my days. I know how to get through it. I know what I'm doing. I know where I am in the story. I know, like, the directors sometimes lose their place in the story and then they get confused. And I've never had that problem, so I've always sort of know where I am in the process. So it's a process of sort of like holding the reins and letting them go for me.
You mentioned it just in that answer, so many different departments and influences. Is it just simply just focusing, like people like to say one game at a time? Is it just focusing it on one part at a time? Is that what keeps you focused as a filmmaker? Because there could be so many different influences pulling you on a day-to-day basis.
I think it's a macro and a micro mechanism. You've got to be able to do the micro and manage the small things, but always have your eye on the big picture. I think that's what makes a director really for me, it's one of the key elements of being able to be a leader, being able to carve enough time for self thought and self realization and self visualization, and then be able to re-communicate that out and then accept back what you're given back, whether it's from an actor, from your production designer, from an editor, from a producer, from a studio. You're constantly filtering and pushing it out and taking it back in. And that's why they call it a collaboration, right? So, being a leader on top of it, you have to, if people look over and the director is not leading the ship, that's when ships go down. That's when you see movies really struggle, I think.
Anthony, my final question is just sort of might be a little bit of a harder question, but as a cinephile, can you name a movie that you feel is maybe overlooked or underrated, but you really love wholeheartedly? And what is it about this specific movie that resonates with you?
Well, I'm kind of like a lover of European cinema, so I think most of the European films are overlooked when it comes to mass market. For me, Fellini, Antonioni, those were my two favorites. Movies like Blow Up, Zabriskie Point, L'Eclipse, Le Notte. These are masterpieces that are heralded as masterpieces mainly to an international audience and a cinephile audience. But I think for mass entertainment, people overlook the resonance of a film and how it can sort of change your life. You can watch a movie, it can change your being. When it comes to Hollywood, like on the other hand, I'm a great lover of the sort of action movies of the 80s and into the 90s, the Die Hards of the world. Heat is probably one of my favorite movies of all time. Everybody loves Heat. I love it for a different reason. I love it because it's not the action or the drama. It's the fact that it's a movie about a bunch of guys that didn't get the American dream. And in the post-Reagan economics and post-Vietnam and this era we're living in, it symbolizes people's willingness to take matters in their own hands, at all costs. And it's the meeting of that character arc, that ethos of the character, and this incredible action that make it such a brilliant movie. A brilliant movie way beyond, I think, its regarded brilliance.
Anthony, thank you so much for your time. Really love Surrounded.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for your time.